For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Award-winning writer Fred Khumalo discusses his latest novel titled The Longest March. So Fred, this book is set during an important part in our country's history. Can you briefly tell us about that history and why you decided to write a book based on it in 2019?
Yes, in the middle of 1899, there were rumors that the British were to declare war on the Transvaal Republic, and in other words, the Boer Republic of Transvaal. And as a result, the Boers started setting themselves to defend the Republic, but most specifically the gold mines, because that's what the British were interested in. So that caused a lot of panic in the city. White people who could afford started leaving the city. They took trains, they took ox wagons and so on. But now a lot of black people were destitute. They couldn't leave the city as soon as they could. And then a lot of them were stuck, basically stuck in the city. And now the mines had been shut down in anticipation of a British invasion. And because the mines were the source of income for the majority of black people in the city, people started fighting. Food riots exploded all over the city. There was chaos. And then ultimately, some people said, okay, we want to go home. But there were no trains by then. There were no trains to take them to Natal or Eastern Cape, wherever they came from. And a group of them approached a man called John Marwick. He's a white man who worked for the Native Affairs Department at that time. Yeah, and so incidentally, he was very proficient in Zulu because he came from Natal. And he had actually recruited many Zulu people from Natal and Zululand to come and work on the mines. So they approached him and they said, please do something. We're desperate to leave the city. We realize there are no trains now. Come up with a plan. And what he did was very ingenious and brave. He said, okay, we're going to walk from Johannesburg to Natal. But for us to do that, we have to prepare the ground so that when we pass through white-owned farms, they mustn't shoot, mistaking us for an invading army. So he wrote a series of letters to the government, to the various landrosts. At the time, the magistrates were called landrosts in different parts of the route that they were going to follow. To say, when you see a group of black people approaching, do not shoot. We come in peace. We are just passing through. Yeah. So that's what happened. So on the 7th of October, these people, between 7,000 and 8,000 of them, mainly men and some women and children, and all Zulus, because it was specifically designed for people from Zululand and Natal. So they left Johannesburg, Brett University, where they camped the previous night. They left on the 7th of October. They walked. And you have to recall, this is October. October is infamous for the thunderstorms, and of course, back then, wild animals still reigned supreme. So they were exposed to all those dangers as they were marching home. So it took them 10 days to get to Ladysmith. If you can imagine, 8,000 people, not just walking freely, because they had to grab whatever they could of their precious possessions, and they walked. 10 days it took them, and they got to Natal. And miraculously, there were no fatalities, no one died. Of course, some people collapsed out of exhaustion, lack of hydration, there was not enough water. Yeah, so they had to be rescued and put on ox wagons and so on. So it was that thing that inspired me to say, okay, how do I bring this hidden pocket of our history to the public domain? I'm a novelist, so I decided to dramatize it and write a novel.
Is there a specific target audience for this novel, and do you think that it will help South Africans as we deal with xenophobic issues?
It's for, there's no specific audience or target market. I think it will be enjoyed by ordinary South Africans from all walks of life, different races and cultures, because my characters are such that there's a white woman, stroke colored woman, Philippa. There is her boyfriend, fiancé, Ndugu, who's a Zulu guy. There's Kaolengweni, who forms this triangle. And of course there is John Mawick, the white guy who led the march. He's a white guy, he was English speaking. He grew up in Richmond. So people across racial and cultural divides will enjoy the book. And what will they learn from this? It's a history lesson in a way, but of course it's an entertaining read. I hope so. Because as a novelist, you're not just delivering a lecture, teaching people. You are entertaining them, you are teaching them, and you are challenging their prejudices and stereotypes and so on. Because I deal here with homosexuality. Back then it existed, but it was never spoken about. So I'm bringing it up. I'm bringing issues of identity. Philippa is of mixed race, and you know, all those questions started being interrogated a long time ago. It's not a new subject. And xenophobia as well comes into the picture here, because people who worked on the mines came from all over Southern Africa. Yeah, and so I explore many themes through the medium of this novel.
In the book, Mr. Mawick, also known as Umuhle, instructed Ndugu to lead 7,000 Zulus from Joburg to Natal by foot. Can you tell us why was that the case, and why was Ndugu not keen in the beginning, and how Philippa helped to push him? And tell us why his background of not being able to make decisions also was brought up in this book. Okay,
Ndugu is a fictional character. He never existed, but he's interacting with a real-life character, Umuhle Mawick. In creating Ndugu, I wanted to explore Zulu history, how the war of 1879, Isandlwana and Rocks Drift, how that decimated the Zulu kingdom and Zulu nationhood. And after the war, a lot of Zulu people just scattered all over the country. Some of them went and became Xhosa people and became Mvengu, who became Xhosa, and as others went to Zimbabwe. You know, it was chaotic. So Ndugu is one of those who, though he stayed in Natal, he didn't stay where he grew up. He went to a mission school. He became Christian, baptized and Christianized. So his essence, his identity was impacted upon by the war, and how he grew up as this very insecure guy now, who he runs at the lightest suggestion of chaos, he runs away. So he doesn't want to commit. So I decided to make him that kind of character who vacillates and who doesn't want to stand for anything. And I put him across this very strong woman who's very firm. He says, you must take a stand. And that is why he becomes one of the leaders by default of this march.
Your previous book addressed the issue of the SS Mendi. It was called The Dancing the Death Drill. Can you tell us why you keep on going back to the historical events when you write your books?
Yes, I'm fascinated by history. I read a lot of history, real history. And I realize that many South Africans, black or white, are not sensitive to these stories, are not aware of these stories. This story of the Long March, when I presented the book last night at Love Books in Melville, people were shocked. We went to university, we read history, but we never learned about this, because it's one of those hidden stories, like the story of the Mendi as well. So I have taken upon myself to look for these hidden pockets of history, to bring them to the public domain through the medium of the novel. So I'll be writing more historical novels, because they fascinate me as well.
You must have made a significant research before writing this book. Tell us about that process.
When you are writing a historical novel, because it's something that really happened, and you're dealing with people who really existed, and their families are still around. You can't afford to make a mistake. you have to respect the role that they played and the legacy that they left behind.
Yeah.
So I had to read a lot of books around the Anglo-Boer War itself, and how Undugu comes from King Etwayo's court. His father was a herbalist at King Etwayo's palace. So I had to read a lot about day-to-day living in King Etwayo's time and palace. It comes through in the book. So I read a lot of books about King Etwayo and the war of 1879 in Sandlwana. And then I had to go to the library archive and read newspapers of that time, of 1899, how they reported the story of the march, because they did report it. It was a big story for the newspapers. So I read those stories. But what I noticed when I read those stories was the whole story is being told from the point of view of one individual, Mawick.
Okay.
And the black guys who were with him don't get mentioned by name. They just say natives.
Wow.
Yeah. So I thought that was an injustice. Let me address it. So that's why I wrote the book.
It was also interesting to read that Moshe's name come from a place you and I know back in KZN. Can you tell us how his name relates to that place?
So when he started working on the Native Affairs Department, he was very friendly with black people, especially Zulu-speaking black people on the mines and in Johannesburg in general. So they said, Muhle Lumlungu. He's the good one, Muhle, Umuhle. So he became Muhle. So now, to this day, you go to any part of the country, the Home Affairs Office is colloquially referred to as Kwamuhle because of that guy.
Because of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in Durban, there is actually a museum.
I know.
Kwamuhle.
Yeah. Without giving too much to the readers, can you please share some of the haggles or problems that they had to encounter along the way while they were going to KZN?
Yes, first of all, this was wartime. The war was actually declared as they got to Ladysmith, but already as they were leaving, they were harassed by the Boer commandos. When they reached Prospecton, close to the border of, well, they passed the border, yes, close to the border of Natal, they were stopped by a Boer commando, which was trying to set up its ammunition on a hill. But the guns, the cannon that they were going to use was too heavy for them. So they commandeered these Zulu guys, 400 of them, hey, come here and lift our gun. And so they pushed this gun onto a hill. So at gunpoint, so they had to cooperate at gunpoint. So they were terrified. So that's one of the challenges. And there were some problems as well internally within the marchers. People were stealing from each other, pickpockets. You know, when you are in a big crowd, things happen. Yeah, but of course we don't want to spoil the story for our readers.
Yeah. This book also raises the issue of an interracial relationship that was between Philippa and Ndugu. What message were you trying to pass on to the readers when you brought it up?
Yeah, there were relationships like that. Some famous people like Theo Soga, Reverend Theo Soga of the Eastern Cape. He was married to a Scottish woman, a white woman from Scotland. Yeah, and there were many. Those were educated ones. So, but of course, even though there was no law against mixed marriages, the attitudes were highly developed that a white woman or a white person cannot fall in love or let alone get married to a native, as black people were called back then. So it was taboo. It was taboo. It was like intolerable. But I decided to bring that story to the fore, to challenge racial attitudes, which date back from then, which still persist to this day.
To this day.
I mean, 120 years later.
We still have the same issue. When I read the story, to me it sounded as if it was a movie. What would you say if someone were to approach you on making this book a movie?
I would love for this book to be turned into a drama series on TV or a movie even, you know, because it has that potential. It's very dramatic. It's very cinematic and so on. Just to, now that you mentioned the drama part of it, to go back to my previous book, Dancing that Thriller, about the sinking of the SS Mandy. That book has been turned into a stage play, which as we speak is being performed in Brisbane in Australia. Last month or 2 months ago, I was in Norway at Bergen Arts Festival. That's where they invited me because they were performing it there. From Norway, they are now in Australia. And a few months before, they were in London. I wasn't there. They performed in London at the Royal Opera House, and they performed in Southampton along the coast. Now they are in Australia, Brisbane. Indications are that they are going to be bringing that play to South Africa in Cape Town early in the new year, 2020. I'm not sure about the exact date, but that shows you that there's an interest in these kind of stories.
So how do you feel as a writer?
Yeah, I was thrilled that they took my story, they put it on the stage, and it's a musical. So the dialogue that you read in the book is actually being sung by these beautiful actors and actresses, and I was like overwhelmed by how they interpreted my book. You know, that was very, very, very.
This will also get the
Let's hope so. Let's hope so. Let's hope so. Yeah.
It will be interesting.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That was Fred Khumalo speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about his novel titled The Longest March.